On a quiet afternoon, the kind where the air seemed to hum with stillness, Officer Mark Jennings cruised through the polished streets of Oakwood Heights. It was the sort of place where lawns were cut just so, and white picket fences stood like sentinels in front of every home. Jennings, a cop with years of experience under his belt, had seen it all and thought he had it figured out. To him, this was his domain. He knew who belonged and who didn't. As he rolled past one of the blocks, his eyes caught a man walking down the sidewalk. The man was tall, wearing a well-tailored suit and carrying a leather briefcase. Jennings slowed the patrol car, narrowing his eyes. His instinct twitched. Something about this man felt wrong, out of place. He couldn't explain why. Jennings didn't hesitate. He flipped on his lights and pulled over. The man, still walking with purpose, stopped and turned, his eyes calm but expectant. "Afternoon, officer," the man said, his voice steady. Jennings stepped out of the car, arms crossed, his stance wide and intimidating. "What are you doing around here?" The man raised an eyebrow, not flinching. "I'm walking home from work. Is that a problem?" Jennings's eyes flicked to the man's briefcase, then to his suit. "Yeah, that's a problem. You don't belong here." The man's jaw tightened, but his voice stayed calm. "That sounds like an assumption, officer, not a professional one." Jennings's patience thinned. "Let me see your ID." With a slight hesitation, the man pulled out his wallet. "Kendrick Lewis," he said, handing it over. The name didn't register with Jennings. "What do you do?" Jennings asked, his suspicion growing. "I work at the district attorney's office," Kendrick replied, his tone even. "A lawyer, huh?" Jennings's lip curled in annoyance. He didn't like the way Kendrick spoke, too composed, too sure of himself. Kendrick didn't respond, and that only seemed to irritate Jennings more. "You don't look like you belong here," Jennings said bluntly, stepping closer. Kendrick didn't flinch. "I think you're making assumptions based on my appearance. But if you really need to see my ID, it's right here." Jennings was tired of the game. He reached for his cuffs. "Turn around. You're under arrest." "What?" Kendrick's eyes widened, his voice full of disbelief. "On what grounds?" "Resisting arrest," Jennings snapped, spinning Kendrick around and slapping the cuffs on him. A few neighbors peered out from behind windows, whispering. A pair of teenagers across the street were recording the whole thing on their phones. Kendrick protested as he was shoved into the back seat of the cruiser. "This is ridiculous," Kendrick said through gritted teeth. Jennings smirked. "Tell it to the judge." The next morning, the courthouse buzzed with the usual chaos. Papers shuffled, people murmured, and the faint hum of coffee machines could be heard. Kendrick sat quietly outside the courtroom, his wrists free but his mind still tight with focus. He adjusted his tie, flipping through his briefcase with meticulous care. He had a plan, one Jennings hadn't seen coming. Inside, Officer Jennings stood with his colleagues, smug and unaware. "This guy's got no chance," he boasted, laughing as he talked about the arrest. Kendrick looked up from his papers. His gaze met Jennings's for just a moment, but Kendrick didn't acknowledge him. His attention shifted back to his case, his expression unreadable. When the court session began, Jennings's voice rang out with confidence as he recounted the events from the previous day. He described Kendrick as uncooperative, suspicious, and out of place in the neighborhood. Kendrick's silence only fueled Jennings's certainty. But when the judge, a sharp-eyed woman named Judge Marie Collins, turned to Kendrick for his defense, the room grew still. "I appreciate the chance to speak," Kendrick said, standing slowly, his briefcase still in hand. His voice was calm, but every word seemed to carry weight. "Before I continue, it's important you know who I am." Kendrick opened his briefcase and handed a document to the bailiff, who then passed it to the judge. The room tensed, and Jennings's heart sank as the words on the paper became clear. Kendrick Lewis Robinson, Chief Federal Prosecutor for the district. A stunned silence settled over the courtroom. Jennings's confident grin turned to shock as he processed the revelation. He had arrested the wrong man. "Chief Federal Prosecutor," Judge Collins repeated, her voice a mix of disbelief and caution. Kendrick nodded without emotion. "Yes, Your Honor. I am that man. And while I don't usually find myself on this side of the courtroom, I felt it necessary for this officer's actions to be fully exposed. Jennings swallowed, his throat dry. His mind scrambled for a way out. But Kendrick wasn't done. You didn't arrest me for breaking the law, Kendrick continued, his gaze unwavering. You arrested me because I didn't fit your idea of who belongs in this neighborhood. Jennings opened his mouth, but no words came out. This isn't just about me, Kendrick said, turning his attention back to the judge. This is about a system that allows people in power to act on assumptions instead of facts. A system that allows them to break the law with impunity. The courtroom was still, the weight of Kendrick's words hanging in the air. Jennings's face burned, but his voice was a mere whisper when he finally spoke. I was just doing my job, he muttered, his voice trembling. Kendrick stepped forward, his words sharp. Public safety? Tell me, Officer Jennings, what exactly about me looked unsafe? Was it my suit? My briefcase? Or was it just the color of my skin? The silence in the room felt suffocating. Jennings shrank into himself, his bravado shattered. Kendrick wasn't just exposing the officer's mistake. He was laying bare the deep, insidious roots of prejudice that ran through the system. The judge, her gaze steady and unyielding, turned to Jennings. Officer Jennings, I am ordering a full investigation into your actions. You've breached not just professional ethics, but the trust of this community. Your actions will be referred to the district's oversight board. The gavel slammed, and the room erupted with murmurs of shock. Jennings sat, frozen, his face pale and gaunt. His colleagues who had once laughed at his bravado now kept their distance. Kendrick, meanwhile, left the courtroom with quiet dignity. Outside, a young man approached him, still holding his phone. Mr. Robinson, the man said nervously, I just wanted to thank you. What you did in there. It gives people like me hope. Kendrick smiled softly. It's not about me, he replied. It's about making sure this doesn't happen to anyone else. The days that followed were a whirlwind. The story of Kendrick Robinson's courage spread like wildfire, sparking conversations about racial profiling and police accountability. Social media exploded with support for Kendrick, and the hashtag Justice with Kendrick went viral. At the police precinct, the atmosphere shifted. The internal investigation into Officer Jennings's conduct moved swiftly, and the evidence Kendrick had presented proved damning. By the end of the week, Jennings had been suspended, and soon after, he resigned in disgrace. Meanwhile, Kendrick used the momentum from his case to build something greater. He founded a non-profit organization, Justice Forward, dedicated to fighting racial profiling and promoting accountability in law enforcement. His message resonated across the country, and the ripple effect began to change the way people thought about justice. Months later, Kendrick returned to Oakwood Heights, the very place where it all began. As he walked down the same street where he had been humiliated, a young boy on a bike approached him. Mr. Robinson, the boy said, his voice full of wonder. I saw your video. My dad showed it to me. He says you're like a superhero. Kendrick chuckled softly, crouching to the boy's level. I'm no superhero, just someone trying to do what's right. And you can do it too. Work hard, believe in yourself, and always stand up when you see something wrong. The boy nodded, his eyes full of determination. I want to be like you when I grow up. Kendrick smiled, feeling a warmth in his chest. This was why he fought. As the years passed, Justice Forward grew. It became a beacon of hope for those who had long been silenced by injustice. Police departments across the country started adopting reforms inspired by Kendrick's story. His message of accountability, equality, and change reverberated across classrooms, news programs, and policy discussions. But Kendrick knew the work was far from over. In his quiet moments, he remembered the pain of that day, the humiliation, the struggle, but he also knew it had been worth it. For the fight for justice was not just about righting a wrong. It was about creating a future where everyone, no matter their skin color or their story, could walk without fear. And as long as he had breath in his body, Kendrick would keep pushing. Because justice wasn't just an idea, it was a choice.